All right, Luna Owls. This is fifth grade Luna Owls. This is Miss Adeniji with your video for the week. This week we'll be learning about interdependency. Now we have gone over this topic before in interdependency when we created our ecosystems. So this video will just be a review to help you with your assignment on Google Classroom. After you watch this video and have done small group with me, make sure that you go to Google Classroom and do your assignment. Also, there is an extra credit opportunity after this video, so please stay tuned towards the end, and it's also posted on Google Classroom as well. So let's get right into it. So interdependency, remember when we talk about interdependency, we talk about two things. We talk about living and non-living things. And what living things are things that grow and reproduce. Okay, so things such as grass, animals, trees, humans, anything that can grow, that can reproduce is something that's considered a living thing. Also, as a reminder, living things depend on non-living and living things to survive. So think of a human and think of the living and non-living things it depends on in order to survive. So let's talk about non-living things. So non-living things, these are things that cannot consume something in order to survive. And consume means like to eat, or these things cannot multiply and reproduce. So these things are like cell phones, a house, rocks, water, and the sun. Yes, the sun is a non-living thing. Although it may seem like it's alive, it's something that can't be reproduced, and it doesn't really need to consume something in order for it to stay alive. Now, I know most people would be like, well, Mr. Energy, doesn't it live off, nitrogen and all these other different chemicals? But the sun is actually something that is non-living, okay? So we have two scenarios right here that I want you to look at real quick. And I want you to identify what the living and non-living things are and how do they depend on each other. So remember, you can pause this video and talk about what the living and non-living things are and how they depend on each other. So in this picture, it looks like there is a bird's nest in the tree. There's the sun, there's the grass, and there's some clouds. So we know that the living things in this picture are the trees, the birds, eggs, and the grass, right? And some of the non-living things are the sun, the clouds, and also you may not be able to see it, but air is also in here too. So we know that air is not living. And how do these things depend on each other? Well, the sun needs to, the tree depends on the sun in order to grow, because the tree needs three things in order to survive, which is water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, right? So we know it's water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight. So all of these things are non-living things that help this tree in order for it to survive. And also the egg is also needing the sunlight, okay? The sunlight to warm it up. Also probably is needing carbon dioxide for the little birds that are in there to survive. And also the nest is also depending on the tree, right? So it's depending on the tree for shelter. And another living thing is the grass. The grass depends on the sun as a non-living thing in order to survive, because the grass is just like the tree and it needs three things, which is water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight as well. Okay, so let's look at our second scenario. It looks like we're in a grocery store, and it looks like these are some items on the shelf, and it says bottled water for $1. So I also wanted to show you that in everyday life, we also depend on non-living things, like this water, for instance, which is non-living, right? And then this person would be a living thing. Okay, and this person would depend on this water in order to survive, because as humans, we always want to make sure that we stay hydrated, okay? All right, so let's look at another scenario where we can identify living and non-living things. So we have the sun, the air, some grass, a rabbit, a mushroom, and a tree. So take this time to try to figure out what are the living and non-living things in this picture. Remember, you can pause this video. All right, so we know that the sun is non-living. Okay, we know the grass is living. We know air is non-living. The rabbit is something that is a living thing because it can reproduce. The mushroom is something that is a living thing because it can reproduce and it needs to consume something in order to grow. And the same with the tree. So we have 2 non-living and 4 living things. Okay. All right, so also when we talk about living and non-living things, we also talk about the food chain as well. So remember, we created our own food chains and our own food webs, right? So in this food chain and food webs, you're to identify the consumer, producers, and decomposers. So we know that in a food chain, that the first thing that we start off with is the producer. Now, the producer can be anything that's which is usually carnivores, right? And then we have our decomposers down here. And then the cycle continues on and on, right? So now I have a question for you. Okay. How would a reduction or loss of consumers affect producers? So right here we have our producers, and you know that producers can only be things that can get its energy from the sun, which are trees and bushes. And then we have our consumers right here, which I'm going to call them rabbits, because we know that rabbits usually eat things from trees and bushes. All right, so if there was a reduction or loss of consumers, how would that affect the producer? So basically saying there are no consumers that eat these producers, how would this affect the producers? All right, and you should say something as though that there would be an increase of producers. All right, remember you can always pause this video. So there would be an increase of producers if there was a reduction or loss of consumers. All right, so now this is what your extra credit will be about. So I showed you a lot of scenarios and drawings of living and non-living things depending on each other or one depending on the other. So for extra credit, I want you to draw a living and non-living thing and show how they depend on each other or how one depends on the other. Please upload this to the Google Classroom, and here's the code as well. And I'll see you guys next video. Bye.